Hello, everyone. My name is Sania Irfan. My pronouns are she, her. I am a South Asian woman wearing a pink scarf and a pink shirt sitting against a somewhat boring white wall, and I am calling in from Karachi, Pakistan. As the program manager at Yeah Impact and as the producer of this workshop, I am so delighted to welcome you to Climate Action at Work, produced by NYU Los Angeles. Now, we are increasingly becoming aware that climate action is a continuous practice. It must be put to work at home, at school, at work, and everywhere in between. But how can one integrate sustainability in their jobs? How can one do the work necessary to combat climate change at work? We have an incredible panel with us today who can speak to these questions and more. For the first half of this workshop, we will hear from all panelists on the stage right here. And in the second half, each panelist will move to their breakout sessions for a Q&A where you, the attendees, will be able to ask them questions. I will now leave you in the extraordinarily capable hands of our wonderful moderator, someone who I am a huge fan of, Lena Sadowsky, who is an author, filmmaker, and educator. In addition to serving as program director at NYU LA, she has written numerous screenplays and produced films such as The Wedding Planner. Her debut novel, Just Fall, was published by Penguin Random House in 2016, and her Burial Society series launched in 2018, with the second book in the series, The Empty Bed, published in 2020. The Burial Society series is in development for television, along with Sadowsky's original pilot set in the marijuana industry. She is also the author of Convince Me, published in August 2020, and her fifth thriller, Privacy, will be published in the spring of 2022. Welcome, Nina.
My pleasure to welcome you all today. As Sania gave me an excellent introduction, but my name is Nina Sadowsky. I'm a white Jewish woman. I have dark hair, which today I'm wearing up in a very messy bun. All black clothes because I am a native New Yorker, even though I live in Los Angeles. And I am zooming or hopping in today from the NYU Los Angeles Academic Center, which is located in the heart of the Fairfax district on Chumash and Tongva land. I'd like now to introduce our incredible panelists. We have a great group of people here who have really worked to embody in their careers and their lives their principles about sustainability. So I'm going to do brief introductions because you will hear more from all of them. But it is my pleasure to welcome Julie Christeas, is a producer and the founder and CEO of Tandem Pictures, a platform for people, the planet, and powerful storytelling. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Nina.
I'd also like to welcome Amer Jandali, the founder of Future Meets Present. I would like to welcome my colleague at NYU, Matt Parker, who is an associate professor at the NYU Game Center and the co-founder of the OpenAir collective, which does carbon capture, which I've been learning a lot about from Matt, and which is really fascinating. I'd also like to welcome Smiely Khurana, who is a Real Green sustainability lead and the producer of the Sustainable Act podcast, as well as Weinstein, a queer screenwriter and activist, and also, most notably, the creative director of this year's Hollywood Climate Summit. And Lena Welch, who is a regional sustainability advisor with the Green Spark Group. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'd like to start, if you could briefly, because we don't have a lot of time and we have a lot of brilliance here, but if you guys could, and I don't see where Matt is. Where did Matt go? But I would like to start with, a simple question for each of you. How did you get here? What was your career path? So it's kind of your 2-minute history. I don't even know if we have time for a 5-minute history, but, a 2-minute history, and how that sort of meshed with your desire to work sustainably. Who would like to start with that? Amer, do you want to jump in?
I would love to. Could you repeat the question? I think I only heard the second half of it.
How did you get here? What, in a short version, what has been your career path, and how did you, merge that with your commitment to fighting climate change and working on sustainability?
Solid. Yeah, happy to. I think I'm probably going to echo what a lot of people are going to say, but it truly started with a heartbreak for me. And it was quite simply a documentary, actually, that I watched. My background started in nightlife. I was a nightclub DJ. Coincidentally, I happened to be in a setting that also looks like that. That was not intentional at all. But I was a nightclub DJ, and one night at 3 a.m, watched this documentary about plastic bags, and that was my heartbreak. The rest of the questions followed, and that's how it started.
And you want to tell us a little bit about what it is that you're doing now, your current career?
Sure. Yeah, the documentary about plastic bags was the first thing that broke me open. And then now I'm working on climate solutions from the lens of visualizing what I like to refer to as the desired state. So what does the future look like without single-use plastic bags? And that's one where reusables are the norm, reusable systems are the norm. And then I have a product that I can grab in a moment. You can check back with me, it's in my backpack. But I'm a designer now, a design studio called Future Meets Present.
Okay. Smiely, you want to jump in next?
Absolutely. Hi. So mine was how I got started, and I was in university studying film, and sometimes we would get perks like tickets to film festivals and events for free, and I was that student that would always take advantage of free tickets, and one happened to be a sustainability focused conference, and that was the very first time that I was exposed to the impact that our industry has on the planet, and shocked that we weren't even talking about this in my film program at school. And that was like, I had a light bulb moment. I knew then and there that this is something I want to bring more light on, and how can I, be more responsible as an emerging producer, and the rest is history. I'm here today still doing the work.
Okay. And just tell us a little bit about your current work. What is it what exactly do you do with Real Green?
Yeah, so I'm the Real Green Sustainability Lead. I work with the BC Film Commission. It's the very first film commission in all of Canada to have an in-house position to really take the sustainability initiative and movement and advance it in our industry here. And so I work with our local stakeholders, studios, productions, labor organizations, the community, municipalities, everybody from every angle on creating solutions, working towards a circular economy. So it's a little bit. And then I have the Sustainable Act podcast, which you mentioned very nicely in the introduction. I also lead a podcast that focuses on environmental issues and bringing change makers like all of you here today together, and just shining light on people and their work.
Okay, Julie, I'm going to bounce it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. It is Climate Week in New York City, so this is just the best time ever to be sitting with all of you. I had a really circuitous route here. If anyone ever wants to talk about the crazy job path of producers, we can offline about that another time. But when I founded Tandem Pictures in 2010, the impetus was to give women more of an opportunity behind and in front of the camera. And the moment I pointed the lens at one underrepresented group, my vision exploded, and I was like, well, hang on, it's not just women. It's women of color and people of color and LGBTQIA. And wow, there's a lot of ageism. And all of the stories I was passionate about telling, and the filmmakers that I wanted to work with and do work with, usually came from underrepresented communities. And it very organically happened that it felt disingenuous to me to work with these filmmakers and to tell stories that I felt passionate about and go into communities and not care how we practiced our work. And I had the great privilege of the first film I made under the Tandem Pictures banner was in Alaska at a time where the tax credit was robust. And we were the first narrative feature to be allowed into Denali National Park. And as a New Yorker, my mind again exploded at what untouched nature looked like. And it became a mission to really do great work and tell great stories with amazing filmmakers, and to do it in a way that we could all be proud of, that we could say we left this place better than when we came. We didn't harm our fellow citizens or the planet while making this work. And that's what we continue to do.
Hey. This was my bad as a moderator. I just want to remind you, when you next speak, all of you, just do a quick description of what you look at, like for accessibility purposes. But I'm going to go over now to Lena. Why don't you do the same? Just give a little background on how your career path married with your sustainability efforts.
Thank you. My name is Lena Welch. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white lady with short hair and got my plant babies in the background. Lots of natural light too, as I like it. I got here because I moved to LA as a writer, wanted to write television, took kind of the natural path towards that, working on set as a PA, and doing that for several years, really became very concerned about the general amount of waste and just lack of concern at all about the impact of our filmmaking. And as soon as I saw a job posting for a sustainability PA, I kind of took that on as like, that's my next step, and just got really far deep into it to the point where I was like, okay, I can write later. First things first, the urgency is real. Let's, transform this industry and the culture around it. And then we can come back around to the original dream. So now I work for Green Spark Group, doing consultations on multiple network studios, productions, currently working as a regional sustainability advisor for Netflix, helping them with their Los Angeles productions. And that's me in a nutshell.
Okay. Allie?
Hey everyone, I'm Allie. My pronouns are she, her. I am wearing a black shirt with little daisy flowers on it. I have medium length dark brown hair, and my background is what looks like a fake bookcase, but is really just an awesome tapestry. And I feel like my coming to where I'm at now in terms of kind of combining my passions for the environment and storytelling have constantly been interweaved. I started writing mostly in high school and kind of was always attracted to more like grounded, apocalyptic, and grounded sci-fi narratives. So I kind of was always putting those environmental aspects into those worlds. And then after I graduated, I was living in New York, and I was working for IFC Films in acquisitions, and I was working very insane hours as it goes when you are an assistant. And I remember getting to the office at like 5 a.m. and looking up at the giant skyscraper, and every single light would be on in the entire building. And when no one was there, and I was like, why are all these lights on? And so I was like, let me kind of investigate this. And I actually ended up at a session hosted by Earth Angel, who is one of our sponsors and partners of the summit this year. And they were talking about how they were doing all this green production on set. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a huge endeavor. Why are people not talking about this more? Why is this not being applied to office spaces, et cetera? So I kind of kept that in mind as I continued down the TV writing path. I ended up moving to LA. I worked at Stars for a bit in current programming, and then I switched to work in development at Damon Wayans Jr.'s production company, Two Shakes Entertainment. And then after 2 years there, one of our shows called Glamorous moved forward into a writer's room at Netflix. So I became the writer's assistant on that show. And then I switched to being the writer's assistant after that room wrapped on a new Law and Order spinoff called For the Defense. And so that entire time, I was also kind of doing all this work outside of the writer's assistant world, both with our organizations. I'm the co-president of the Junior Hollywood Radio and Television Society. And then I'm also involved in Young Entertainment Activists. And I am the creative director of the Hollywood Climate Summit this year, as Nina mentioned. So I've kind of always been hopping back and forth between these two worlds that for a while felt kind of separate. And as I lived in LA and created these communities, ended up combining those two passions. And now as a writer, I really focus on sustainable storytelling. And I often try to weave that into a lot of the stories that I'm pitching in writers' rooms that otherwise would seem unrelated to climate. So that's kind of I can talk more about that later, but that's
what I love about what you said, Allie. One is that seeing on the lights, all the lights on, like literally switched your switch, flipped your switch and said, okay, lights on, my light came on. I thought that was very beautifully said. And also I think, because the point of today is really exactly what you did. How do you pursue your path and also advance your beliefs? So thank you for that. I want to talk to Matt next. I'm so glad you got in, Matt. Matt is a colleague of mine at NYU, and although we did not know each other until I reached out to him to join this panel, but I have to say I'm completely fascinated by his work, both in the Game Center and also in carbon collection. So Matt, if you could just talk a little bit about how we're talking career path, how you got to where you are and how you've merged your professional endeavors with your passion for sustainability.
Yeah, so I'm Matt Parker. I am a professor at the NYU Game Center. I am a new media artist, a game designer, and also the co-founder of the OpenAir Collective, which is a grassroots volunteer collective about fighting climate change, primarily through carbon removal. I'm a white guy with a beard and glasses, and I have a pretty nondescript bedroom background behind me that is not that interesting. I had a pretty meandering path to where I am in games and climate. I got out of school as a computer scientist and found I didn't like most of the jobs that were available to me at that point, but I still didn't know what else I wanted to do for a long time. Eventually, I figured out I wanted to make games. It sort of occurred to me out of the blue one day that there was somebody's job it was to come up with the rules and systems for games. It wasn't the person who programmed it. It's not like in board games and card games, the person who cuts the cardboard is the person who designs the system for the game. There has to be somebody who's actually designing systems. And so I looked around for grad schools and opportunities to get into the game industry. I eventually went to NYU ITP, which is not a game program, but had games in it at the time. And if the NYU Game Center had existed at that time, I probably would have gone there. I got out of school. I started working in the game industry. I also do museum installations and new media art installations. But I kind of had always been worried about climate change ever since I was a kid. And something in mid-November 2016 made me decide I couldn't wait for the powers to be to take care of things, that I was going to have to get off my butt and do something myself. Related, my wife was pregnant with our son, and I sort of pictured living in horrible Mad Max style times in 20 years, telling my son about the before times when we had things like running water and trees, and him asking oh, didn't you know this was coming? I'm like, yeah, we knew. And I was like, well, what'd you do to stop it? And I was like, made some video games. So I decided I need to do a little bit more to try to fight climate change. That's it took me a couple of years to figure out what that was, but it was starting the OpenAir Collective.
Would you talk a little bit, because when we spoke, I found this utterly fascinating about what the OpenAir Collective does. If you could just give us a brief description of that.
Yeah, the OpenAir Collective is a group of volunteer individuals dedicated to fighting climate change through effort. So rather than collecting donations or asking people to go to marches, we try to use people's professional skills, networking background. If you're willing to put in time, we'll find a way to maximize your impact for effort into fighting climate change. And we primarily focus on carbon removal, which are a series of natural and technological solutions for removing the CO2 that we put into the atmosphere. So people think that sounds like science fiction, but we have lots of people who are actually doing it already. We just need more support, more energy, more work going into it. And I like to think of it as de-terraforming our planet. We've spent over 100 years putting CO2 into the skies. It's kind of like we've had an oil spill going into our skies for over 100 years. We need to clean up that waste that we put into there. And we need to stop emissions completely as quickly as possible. We also need to clean up the waste that we put into our skies. And we can't just do one or the other.
Thank you. I'm going to throw this question out to everybody, and maybe just lift your hand if you have an answer. But climate change is obviously a systemic issue. We all know that, and it seems that a lot of solutions seem surface, right? It's like I'm using sustainable products, or people sort of give a nod to sustainability. What do you think that we can do to really ensure that we're pushing for systemic change as opposed to individual changes that may not amount? What would be your advice for pushing for systemic transformation? Anyone want to take that one? Did I scare everyone away with that one? Okay, Matt.
I feel weird talking because I just talked, but
raise your hand first. So that's how it goes. It's a meritocracy. It's not a meritocracy. It's dog eat dog here. So go for it.
I think one of the things that really became clear to me, I had tremendous guilt around climate change for most of my life and hoped someone else would take care of it. And I always have, and still sort of pathologically recycle cans and bottles and compost and things like that. But when I really decided to get educated and learn about climate change, I learned that there are relatively few powerful forces that have spent a long time convincing us that we have to take care of our own individual carbon footprints so that they can keep doing the polluting and waste that they do. And so I would say, most of the media that are out there are about telling stories. I think we need to tell the story about what the true causes of climate change are, point the fingers at those real sources, not to blame about the past, honestly, but to try to address it now, because I think there's way too much focus on what can you do? You should take less plane flights. You should drive less. You should get an electric car. Yes, we should do all that. We should do everything. But if we all do that individually, it's not going to be enough to save us. We really need to start making changes at those high level fundamental places and doing research into where those changes can happen.
Lena, do you want to jump in as well there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a huge question. There's many ways that we can go about changing the kind of systematic and the infrastructure that we are looking at. One is by voting, being involved in politics, especially local politics. A lot of the policy that we're going to see in the next few years is really going to drive us forward. As far as incentives, I would also like to see a little bit of punishment for those who are the highest polluters, whether that be a tax or some kind of fining system for those that are contributing more to the problem. And I think that it's just a matter of time and really investing in clean energy, whether that be money or, working towards it in your own career, implementing it on projects that you're involved in, bringing it into your workplace. I think, the more we can encourage demand, the more we will see the supply of those tools and technologies that we really need to get us to where we're going.
Question. Who are the biggest? Oh, did you want to say something, Julie?
I just wanted to say, injustice is systemic. And if we look at injustice as a rule, it certainly applies to climate. And one thing that everyone has in their power, whether you are the systems that be or an individual deciding you might want to make a change, is acknowledgement, first and foremost, that there are injustices and that it is systemic. And then also thinking about what we can do in a positive way. So just in the film entertainment space, which is where I live, one thing that I'm slowly but surely plugging away at is, instead of punitive, punishments and fees and all of these things, thinking about how can we incentivize my colleagues, producers, studios to go green fully, systemically change how we produce work. And one way is always the almighty dollar, and petitioning the federal government with data. Matt, perhaps we can offline afterwards about carbon collection, for film and television and entertainment work that is green. Can there be a federal rebate, just like we have a state-by-state tax incentive that incentivizes my colleagues who say, this is so much work, I already have a job of making the thing. I can't also make it green. It's so much to learn. How can we incentivize those people? And it is through, a small federal credit would give so many productions a post budget. Put it into marketing, put it into whatever you want. But I feel like finding ways that we can reward people for good behavior instead of patting everyone on the back and saying, nice job to you, will be really, really powerful, getting things done quickly, which is what we need to do when it comes to the climate.
Mm-hmm. Smiely or Amer, or Ali, did either any of you want to add something to that? Yeah, Amer, go ahead. Oh.
I do, but I was pointing at Smiely first because I think.
Oh, okay, Smiely, go ahead.
No, I want to agree with Matt, Lena, and Julie and everything they said so far, because that's exactly what we need. And also, I wanted to add on to Julie's point about, that we get that a lot in the industry here, is that I already have so much on my plate. I can't go green. I don't have the time. I don't have the budget. We lived through a pandemic. We still are living through this pandemic, and our industry had to adapt and change, right? We brought this systemic change into it so that we can continue thriving as an industry, continue creating content. It's why are we not having that same sense of urgency when it comes to the climate? Why are we waiting until it becomes another global pandemic to take that real action? And so with all these we have the resources, we have the tools, we have the technology, we have the information. It's just a matter of being accountable and taking that action and really pushing for that change from the top down. But it does take every single person's efforts, but absolutely working with the studios, with the government, all these people need to be equally involved. And we can see it. We saw that in the last year. So,
well, I actually agree with you, Smiely. I think that I think if we're all smart collectively as a culture, we will recognize that we've been disrupted and take advantage of that as an inflection point to really make change in a lot of different areas, because we've been forced to, as you said. And so now I think we should seize that and say, okay, we've been forced to, we've proved that we can be flexible in a ton of different ways and adaptable. Let's push the boundaries of that. Amer?
Yeah, sorry, one last thing. Another example is just last year, the Black Lives Matter movement, and how much we disrupted the space when it came to that, and the diversity, not only on screen, but behind the screen. It's the exact same thing that we need to just take on, and not wait until it's too late to take any action. And yeah, sorry.
No worries. Great. Amer, did you want to chime in on that one as well?
Yeah, definitely. Bits and pieces from what I've heard all around. It always starts with our individual actions, right? Until we take control over those, and then we kind of are craving all right, cool. What's next? How do I scope this up? I'll drop a link here in the comments. There's this really awesome TED Talk that I love with Hal Harvey and John Dewar, a policy climate expert and an engineer. They're talking to each other, and they're so to Lena's point, one asks the other, who's sitting behind the knobs and levers controlling the amount of emissions that are created in this country? And how do we aim our votes and aim our voices in a way that is most effective? And what they talk about is that the energy supply, which the energy sector is responsible for a quarter of the emissions created in this nation, right? The energy is controlled not by the senators or the congressmen, but they're controlled by public utilities commissioners. And each state only has 5 public utility commissioners, which means a quarter of the emissions in this nation are controlled by 250 people. And so if you scale that down to a numbers game and take, the 10 largest states, that's 50 people. So if we know who those people are, we can aim our votes towards them, or we can aim our attention towards them. So on an individual level, when as I feel, I personally have moved past I bring my reusable bag, I bring my reusable cup, I've moved past that, what's next? I look in that direction. And then also just so important to not underestimate our power as employees. Employee powers, we are direct inputs into a system. It's so easy to forget that we're part of systems until our internet goes out. And then it's there's an issue in the telecommunications system that I'm in. Great. And when we're at the workplace, we are immediately part of this workforce that is part of that whole system. And as employees, we have an amazing voice there. Last thing I'll close with, and Lena, maybe you're aware of this too, but Project Drawdown is a partner that I've been working on a relationship with for the last several years. They're about to release or just released the employee playbook for how an employee any job can become a climate job. That's the whole underscore. So no matter where you are in your organization, this is what you need to be advocating for your company to be a drawdown aligned business. And the playbook either is just about to be released or just got released. I'm not sure, but those are my answers. There you go.
That's
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
That leads really perfectly into how I feel about the reality of this. And I think that's really reflective in a lot of our programming for the summit this year that I've contributed to, but also to a program that Lena and I will be talking about later called Climate Ambassadors Network. But I feel very similarly that a lot of what I focus on is empowering assistants and coordinators and people who don't normally feel like they would have an impact in this space to say Hollywood is like a giant web of continuous impact, and like the things that you do as an assistant, even if you, and of course this is like very based on the reality of your privilege within these situations. But if you have the privilege to go to your boss who's a showrunner and say, hey, I have this climate story I would really love to integrate into this show that is not necessarily about climate. I have all these other things that are almost like, the way I think of it, it's like you often can think of it as like, oh, the people at the top are really overwhelming. They have so much power, etc. But within Hollywood, I think, you know, the collective of those employees do have a lot of power, and there are a lot of people that want to make change. And it's almost from like a bottom up reality that if you start filtering in what you think are those smaller ideas, they will eventually like push those upper level of people. It takes a lot of pressure. Like there has to be like a really big push to get to that place. And of course, like I ultimately believe it is these very large companies that are having the biggest effect on our climate. But I don't think that individual then leading to collective action, especially when you're focusing in the Hollywood space, is ineffective. Like it really is effective. And ultimately, I think that I lost my train of thought, but that collective action is really important. And
I just want to say, Allie, that's so important. And I spent so much time during COVID speaking to young people whose big question was, how do I make a difference? And it's always the answer, right? Because as a producer, I can say, I have the power to say, we're going to be a green set, and this is what we're going to do. And if you have questions, please come to me. We're going to talk through how to get the creative as the director visions it, and we're going to talk about how to do it with sustainable practices. But there are so many people who work across all departments, and the more people place value on their contribution to that job, it works hand in hand, right? Like I value myself and my contribution, and so do you, boss.
yeah.
We can make X, Y, and Z changes today that don't cost you any more money, that don't cost the production any trouble, and that are going to make everyone feel so much better about coming to work. We're all going to win. And you're right. The more people just petition and say it doesn't have to look like this. We can do something else. I have a really good friend, an actor, Patrice Jones, who made a hilarious video while he was on his TV show where he smacked a single-use plastic bottle out of someone's hand to petition the show to stop using single-use plastic. And it worked. So that's just a small example, but you're so right.
So I want to pivot quickly because we don't have that much more time. I had many more questions, and I feel like this could go 3 hours. But I wanted to ask, so we were talking about the power of the individual and advocating from wherever you are. But what I'd like to talk a little bit about is like in our industry, I mean, who are the worst actors? Like I've just been reading, for example, about like the impact of, Bitcoin mining on the environment, right? But within the Hollywood entertainment community, where do you guys think is it production? Is it just the policies of the corporate stakeholders? Where do we think that what's the head of the beast in our industry?
Are you trying to ask like what's contributing most to kind
Yeah,
of
like, exactly. What is contributing most? I mean, we're talking about how you can advocate wherever you are, right? And I think that's super important. And as Ali said, you know, we've been working on this Climate Ambassadors Network to teach people how to advocate, right? But if we're talking about not just the small picture, let's get rid of single-use bottles, let's use bamboo instead of plastic. You're talking beyond that. You're trying to think about what are the systemic things, to go back to where I began. What are the systemic practices? I mean, I know, for example, live touring is a terrible burden environmentally, right? But where do you think are the other places that we're really making a bad impact, where we really need to be trying to do something urgent?
If you think about, and I'm interested, Lena, to hear your point of view as someone who works across many productions to help them go green. But from my point of view, if you look at our behavior as consumers, it's all about convenience. And where film is concerned, everything we need, we bring in, from people to sets to catering to props to costumes. We buy new, we bring in, we store, and never see those things again. And if we can change that consumerism, how are things getting here? What vehicles do I need? What is the gasoline impact? How much energy are we using? How much carbon is being emitted from the costumes that I'm having made, you know, custom for this one job? Could I be using clothes that are from another show and remade to fit these purposes? If we look at our habits as gratified consumers, we can really nip in the bud a lot of behavior that it's so large. It's everything. Everything we do is part of the larger environmental issue when it comes to filmmaking. But it does stem from what do I buy and how far is it traveling to get to me? And even doing things as, you know, gratuitous and old fashioned as, like, you know, I have a production in LA, the studio's financing, we need a pack of pens. Instead of a PA going to Staples and walking 2 feet to pick up the pens, someone put it in an envelope and mailed it to me. Why? You know, we don't need to behave that way.
Anyone else want to jump in on how we can affect change, or where we think that the worst impacts are coming?
I would agree that it's the culture and the tradition that I mean, the film industry is like no other industry in that it has such a set culture. And we've been doing things the same way because it's proven to save time, which we have so little of when we get to set. There's so much that needs to be done. So I think it's that we, you know, beyond the tradition of convenience, I think it is also just the tradition of, you know, the unions and the departments all do things the way that they have standardly done things. And as human beings, we're all resistant to change. It's scary. It's not, no one wants to learn something new sprung on them on a given day. It's just not comfortable. So I think we need to all learn how to get out of our comfort zones and learn how to do things a little bit different, like we did with the COVID, you know, bringing in the COVID department. And, you know, they found the budget for the COVID department. I've read a statistic that the COVID department is like 3% of the budget, whereas sustainability is like 0.01% of the budget or something. And it's like, you know, we just need to start making that new consideration that, like, we're going to do things differently, and in accordance, we're going to have things rearranged a little bit. Our line items are going to change. Our budgets are going to change. We're not going to use the same standard budget we used from the previous project. We're going to change it around a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that at this point of disruption where things do seem urgent, I mean, you know, inclusivity seems urgent, and representation and climate very much related to that, because it's racist. Climate and racism are inextricably intertwined. So I think you're right that, you know, there really has to be a sort of a look at how everything mixes and what we can do on both the higher level as well as, you know, on the individual level. Anyone else want to add to that? We have like 1 minute left. So, and I have to read a closing statement and send you into breakout rooms. But Ali, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'll throw this out really quickly and then Smiely can jump in. adding on to what Lena said, for me, like these productions don't happen without first going through an extensive development and writing process. And if those acknowledgments of what's going on with the environment and how we are affected as humans every single day, and have been for a long time, but we all know that the reality is, like, I feel like the IPCC report really blew things up, and now people are like, oh my God, we need to actually address this. But we need to integrate those stories, and not apocalypse, chaos, everyone dying stories, but hopeful, mixed in with like, how are we being affected by everyday things that are happening to climate change as they are happening now. We need to integrate that into storytelling, because that's what's happening before we even hit production at all. And that will influence additionally all of these sustainable measures that everyone else has mentioned once we get into production. So sustainable storytelling.
I also think you can't underestimate the power of storytelling to get other people to change their habits and perspective as well. I mean, you know, I know a lot of social historians think that gay marriage, for example, was directly connected to television like Will and Grace that changed the culture, right? So I feel there's a real opportunity to both educate. I think a lot of people think, well, it's going to be a polemic, we're going to shut down from education. But I think, you know, I always believe you know, spoonful of sugar, right? So you bury the medicine in entertainment, and then people, just to make them more aware. And it can be through a character's action, a setting, you know, as you say, it can be very baked into the story. Smiely, do you have one last thing you wanted to add before I
couldn't have said that better. That's exactly, and you know what Amer said before too, about every job can be a climate job, and it's exactly ties in for behind the screens and on the screen, like changing the culture, normalizing this world that we're living in. And one thing that a friend who's Clara George was a producer and is now at Netflix, she mentions is just adding the sustainability lens on anything you do. So whatever decisions you're making, whether it comes to like the costumes, the trailers, whatever you're doing behind the screens, or even how you're developing these stories and writing these stories, add that lens. It's like, how do we make this normalized more? And how do we create this sustainability shift in our culture? But yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, so I have not much more to add.
All right, so in the interest of keeping to our schedule, which we had a little delay, I'm going to read a closing statement, and I am going to read it because I'm not off book and I don't want to mess it up. And then we'll move on. So we are in the midst of a climate emergency, but a future beyond this emergency is possible. As we learned today, we can work towards this future in many different ways, using a variety of skills and jobs to build this future. But this future requires collective, continuous action. It requires that we use our voices and the spaces that we occupy to advocate for changing the systems that are destroying our climate. It requires that we listen to the science, to the indigenous communities who have long been stewards of our land, and use their knowledge in every task, every job that we do. I want to thank all the panelists for their insights and their time, and for showing us how building one's career and building a better climate future can go hand in hand. We will now hear about a few opportunities that our attendees might be interested in. I'm sure you will be. After which each panelist will move into their own breakout session where attendees can speak with them and ask them questions directly. Again, thank you everyone for your time and for your commitment to these issues. I hope you learn a lot this weekend and that collectively we make a difference. I'm sure that we will.